It started like no other morning in that courtroom. The marble floors echoed under the weight of hundreds of polished shoes. Reporters whispered, shuffling papers and glancing toward the side entrance every 5 seconds. The tension was crawling through the walls like static. Before a lightning strike, the clerk adjusted his glasses. The judge reviewed notes under the low hum of fluorescent lights, and the jury, silent and unreadable, had already taken their seats. Then the double doors opened quietly, and Sean Diddy Combs walked in. He didn't enter like a man who owned music clubs, real estate, and half the fashion industry. He entered like a man who hadn't slept. His eyes scanned the room and locked on no one. A gray tailored suit framed him perfectly, but no amount of designer stitching could cover the storm underneath his skin. Every step he took toward the defense table felt deliberate, like he was walking into a chapter of his life he could never rewrite. The courtroom murmurs were low, but hungry. Former associates seated in the gallery, anonymous spectators who somehow secured access, a few celebrities in sunglasses, trying not to be noticed. The judge banged the gavel sharply once, silencing everyone. But even that thud felt heavier than usual. The charges were complicated on paper, but the heart of the case was simple. Did Shaw Combs behind the curtain of power and money cross a line that could never be uncrossed? And more importantly, would the truth finally come out? A clerk began reading off the case details, and the words felt surreal. Diddy sat quietly, hands folded, occasionally glancing sideways toward his attorney, who leaned in and whispered something under his breath. Diddy didn't nod. He didn't blink. He just stared ahead, as if rehearsing a version of events no one else would believe. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now let's get back to it. The prosecutor, a woman known for dismantling corrupt politicians and white-collar titans, stood with calm fire in her eyes. She didn't pace, she didn't raise her voice. She simply began to paint a picture, a timeline that crisscrossed music tours, midnight flights to unknown airstrips, surveillance footage from decades ago, and anonymous testimonies from people who could no longer stay silent. The jury didn't blink. Every phrase, every pause felt like a scalpel being drawn carefully across the surface of Diddy's past. The prosecutor spoke of manipulation, of fear, of choices made behind closed doors where no camera could ever reach, and she ended with a statement so cold it felt like the courtroom temperature dropped. We're not here to attack a legacy, we're here to reveal what that legacy cost. Diddy's jaw moved slightly. Whether it was a tick, a tremor, or a rage trying to stay buried, no one could tell. But what everyone felt deep in their gut was that this was not going to be a trial about business deals or broken contracts. This was going to be a war of truths, and the first shot had just been fired. The silence that followed the prosecution's opening remarks was so complete it felt like time had stopped. Even the judge leaned back, watching Diddy's face like a man trying to read a storm before it breaks. Then came the first witness. He entered from the far door with U.S. Marshals on either side, tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes shielded behind clear-rimmed glasses, his face pale but composed. He had once been Diddy's most trusted bodyguard. The courtroom collectively held its breath. He took the oath, sat down, and waited for the prosecutor to begin. Tell the court, she said, how long you worked for Mr. Combs. 6 years, he said. His voice was flat like gravel under tires. And what was your role in that time? I handled transportation, security, confidential coordination during tours, and off-record business meetings. That last phrase cut the air like a razor. She leaned in. What do you mean by off-record business meetings? He shifted in his seat. Meetings that weren't on the official calendar, ones I was told to forget before they even happened. The gallery leaned forward, every seat creaking like the floor itself wanted to hear more. Diddy didn't look at him. He stared ahead, his right hand gripping the edge of the defense table so tight the veins in his wrist had risen. The witness spoke of a night in late 2016. A snowstorm had grounded most flights in the Northeast, but Diddy had to be in a room in Manhattan by 2 a.m. No questions, no excuses. He said a private car was dispatched under a fake ride-share company name. Inside the vehicle, a briefcase sat on the seat. He wasn't told what was inside, just to make sure it got into the room, and no one followed. What happened in that room? The prosecutor asked. He paused, looked down, then said 3 men went in. 1 came out. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. The jury shifted, visibly shaken. Someone in the gallery muttered, no way. Another scribbled furiously in a notebook. Did he remain still? But his lawyer leaned in, whispering rapidly. No objection was raised. Not yet. The witness went on. He described Diddy pacing the lobby of a downtown hotel wearing a hoodie, sunglasses at 2:30 a.m., looking over his shoulder every 5 seconds. He remembered Diddy saying one thing over and over under his Wrath this can't blow back, the prosecution asked. Did you ever report this? He hesitated. No. Why not? Because the moment I even thought about it, someone close to me disappeared. I took the warning. The tension in the courtroom was now a living thing. The judge looked troubled. The stenographer's fingers never stopped. The defense still hadn't spoken. It was a chess move, and everyone knew it. They were waiting, but the crowd both inside and the millions watching the updates outside weren't waiting anymore. They were seeing something they never expected, the myth unraveling thread by thread, and the thread had just begun to fray. The defense rose slowly. Diddy's lead attorney, a man known for slicing apart federal witnesses with surgical calm, buttoned his blazer and stepped toward the stand. The room tensed. He didn't even look at the jury, his eyes locked onto the witness like he'd been waiting years for this moment. You mentioned a briefcase, he began, his voice controlled. Did you open it? No, the witness replied. So you have no idea what was inside? I was told not to open it. Told by who? The witness hesitated. Mr. Comey. But you just testified that he never directly said what was in the case. Correct. Then how exactly do you know it contained anything illegal? The bodyguard shifted uncomfortably. I didn't say it. Did I just know? Objection. The defense cut him off, raising a hand. He's speculating. The judge nodded. Sustained. Jury will disregard that last statement. And just like that, the courtroom began to tilt. The defense moved in like sharks who smelled blood in the water. The attorney adjusted his tie, then pulled out a sheet of paper. Do you recall giving this interview to the Source magazine in 2019? Yes, in it you said, and I quote, "Did he always treated me like family? I'd take a bullet for that man." Sound familiar? The witness said nothing, and here, the attorney continued, flipping pages. You said I never saw him cross a line, not once. People talk, but they don't know the real Diddy. That's you correct. I said those things, but now years later, after your employment ended and certain civil cases started gaining traction, now you claim he's responsible for a midnight meeting that resulted in only one man walking out. That's quite a shift in loyalty, isn't it? I'm just telling the truth now, or perhaps telling a version that benefits you financially. You've been paid for interviews, haven't you? I some, yes, books in progress, not finalized. Podcast deal. I haven't signed anything, but discussions have taken place. A long pause. Yes, the defense attorney turned toward the jury for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, credibility is everything. And when a man tells you one truth while cashing checks for another, ask yourself which version is the truth and which is for sale. The gallery stirred. Even the prosecutor frowned slightly. Her arms folded tightly. The momentum had shifted. Diddy didn't move, but for the first time that morning, he closed his eyes. The judge called for a short recess. As people stood, the room buzzed like a hive. Witness left the stand, escorted by marshals. His shoulders were hunched, now smaller somehow, as the jury filed out. Some looked conflicted. One older juror, a woman in her 60s, shook her head, lips pressed tight. And while the prosecution regrouped and the defense calmly returned to their seats, Shah Diddy Comey remained frozen, still as stone. Outside, a storm was brewing in the press, but inside the courtroom the game had just begun, and no one could predict who would bleed first. When court resumed, the temperature in the room had changed. It wasn't the thermostat, it was the shift in energy. The jury looked more alert, more cautious. The gallery had gone from a silent audience to a crowd teetering between disbelief and fascination. But no one, not even the prosecution, expected who was called to the stand. And next, a woman in a navy blue pants suit stepped through the side door, mid-40s, poised, no makeup, beyond the essentials. The room collectively inhaled. She had been one of the most elusive figures in Diddy's past, not a romantic partner, not a business associate, but something far more dangerous in a trial like this. A quiet observer with nothing left to lose, she raised her right hand, swore in, and sat with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from years of carrying something heavy in silent state. Your name for the court, the prosecutor said. She did. In your relationship to Mr. Comey. Her voice was calm. I worked as a compliance advisor for one of his shell companies from 2014 to 2019. The courtroom blinked. A few people started whispering before being silenced by the judge's glare. Did you witness anything during your employment that you believe to be unlawful? She didn't blink. Yes. Can you specify? She nodded slightly. I was ordered to sign off on financial documents that made no mathematical or legal sense. Transfers to dummy corporations, monthly disbursements to companies that didn't exist the week before, and invoices for consulting services that matched no work ever completed. And who gave you these orders? She turned slightly toward the defense table. Mr. Comey. Directly. The words landed like grenades. Diddy's team didn't flinch, but a subtle tension passed through there, the row like a ripple in water. Diddy's lips parted slightly, but he said, "Nothing. Did you keep any records?" She reached into her briefcase, handed a file to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. The judge reviewed the contents for a moment, then nodded to continue. The pages were entered into evidence. "These documents," she continued, "show financial movement across 5 countries. The same routing numbers appear in at least 3 separate investigations by international banking watchdogs." The jury looked stunned. One man sat back, arms folded, jaw twitching. A younger juror scribbled so fast her pen almost slipped out of her hand. "Why didn't you come forward earlier?" the prosecutor asked. The woman looked straight ahead. "Because I was warned." "By whom?" "Someone very close to Mr. Comby's," he said, and I quote, "We know where your mother lives, don't get curious." Gas filled the courtroom again. The judge didn't even bang the gavel this time. He just stared forward, lips tight. The defense objected hearsay. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. You could feel it. No one in the room cared. If it was officially stricken from record, the words had been said, and they couldn't be unheard. The prosecutor stepped forward. "If this court were to subpoena your private communications, would they reflect this threat?" "Yes," she said. "I kept everything, emails, voicemails, even surveillance footage from my door camera. I never deleted a thing." And just like that, the foundation cracked a little more. Diddy finally moved. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, pressing both palms into his temples. It was subtle, but it wasn't missed. The woman looked at him once, not with anger, not with pity, but with the kind of gaze reserved for people who once had power over you and don't anymore. Outside the courtroom, the streets were already erupting. Inside, the courtroom was dead silent. But in that silence, something irreversible had shifted. The story was no longer about who Sean Comby had been. It was now about what he might have done, and who was finally willing to say it. The air was heavy. When the court reconvened after lunch, security was tighter. Now 2 extra marshals posted by the doors, their eyes scanning the crowd like they were expecting something, and maybe they were after what had just been revealed in the morning session. The trial was no longer just a courtroom matter. It was wildfire. As the jury settled back into their seats, everyone waited to see what the prosecution would do next. They didn't waste time. A tall man in a 3-piece suit entered from the back. He carried no briefcase, no folder, just a quiet confidence and a presence that made the entire room sit up. The prosecution introduced him not by name, but by role: forensic financial analyst hired by the state to independently audit over 40 accounts tied to the defendant. He swore and sat down and opened the only item he brought with him, a small leather-bound notebook. When he flipped it open, the defense attorney immediately requested a sidebar. Whispered arguments followed, tense, sharp, but the judge waved it off. "He's been approved. Proceed." The analyst began with a simple statement: "I was not told who I was auditing until the work was complete. The accounts were anonymized during investigation. My only job was to trace activity and flag irregularities." And what he found, according to him, was stunning. Using large monitors wheeled into the courtroom, he walked the jury through a maze of transfers, clean looking on the surface, but suspiciously choreographed. When analyzed by time, frequency, and volume, in less than 10 minutes, he had shown millions in funds traveling through what appeared to be startup shell companies, many of which vanished within 90 days of incorporation. Some were registered to P.O. boxes, some to non-existent people. At one point, he stopped, pointed to a $2.3 million transfer, and said, "This transaction originated from an account tied to an entertainment consulting agency. However, that agency has no listed employees, no website, and no physical address. Furthermore, the IN attached to it was recycled from a dissolved nonprofit based in Atlanta." The courtroom was stone silent. He then highlighted 3 wire transfers made to international accounts within 24 hours of the dates mentioned by the previous witness, the former compliance advisor. They matched up almost exactly. Then came the kicker: these accounts, once traced, ultimately deposit into a single offshore account based in the British Virgin Islands. He said that account is held in the name of a trust company, but the listed primary beneficiary is Sean John Comby. No one moved. A few jurors looked directly at Diddy now, not with suspicion, but with something heavier: betrayal. The defense table didn't move, didn't flinch, but their silence was beginning to say more than their words. When cross-examination began, the defense tried to argue that money moving through shell companies wasn't illegal, that trust accounts were common for high net worth individuals, but the analyst never broke. "It's not the shell companies that are suspicious," he said. "It's how perfectly they collapse one after the other, just before federal reporting deadlines. It's how every audit trail ends in the same destination. And most importantly, it's the pattern. This isn't careless. It's calculated." The jury scribbled notes like their pens were on fire. From the back of the courtroom, someone let out a breath too loudly. Judge didn't bother calling it out this time. The tension was so real you could taste it. As the analyst was dismissed, he didn't look at Diddy. He simply closed his notebook, stood, and walked out the same way he came in, quiet, precise. Undeniable, and in the wake of his testimony, the courtroom didn't just feel different, it felt like something had cracked wide open, like the floor beneath this entire trial had just begun to give way. No one expected the prosecution to call another witness so soon after that, but they did. This time it was someone no one had seen in years, a man with a slight limp, a receding hairline, and a face that looked like it had weathered too many bad nights. He was introduced as a former logistics coordinator for one of Diddy's now defunct touring companies. He had been subpoenaed from out of state, flown in the night before. According to the prosecution, he had something no one else did: direct knowledge of the gray room. That name alone made the gallery shift. Phones buzzed and reporters' pockets silent but frantic. The gray room had been a rumor in the industry for years, a whispered myth about an undisclosed space beneath one of Diddy's old recording studios. Nobody ever had proof until now. The witness spoke carefully, his voice rasping like he hadn't used it in public for a long time. There was a room beneath the main studio in LA. It wasn't on the blueprints. You only got in through a freight elevator in the back corridor. You needed 2 codes.